Any good talk about secrecy should include in it some secret. So let me start with what I'm going to call my Boethius moment. In the introduction to the Consolation of Philosophy, Boethius admits that there are errors in his work, but they've been put there deliberately for the discerning reader to locate. So if you happen to find fault or contradiction in the Consolation of Philosophy, Boethius could smile knowingly and say, "Yes, I know," as if you and he had been let in on a special secret. So, in the spirit of Boethius, let me start by saying there are a few things I am not telling you about this talk. That is, I am going to be keeping secrets from you. Indeed, I am doing this in order to be instructive, because secrets are curious things when you think about them. Just because you know something is being kept secret from you does not tell you about the propositional content of that secret, what the secret is about, which is in itself curious. In the same spirit, there are certain things I'm not telling you, but these are not secrets. Rather, they are private. They are things I am not hiding from you, but rather I do not think that you need to know, nor do I think you have the right to ask about. Unlike secrets, the ones I am keeping from you, if you pry into my privacy, I may well feel entitled to ask you not to pursue the matter any further. Thus, any questions you ask me in question time, I can simply reject by saying, "Sorry, that's a personal matter, I cannot answer that." It's a very convenient way to get out of any issue. Thank you, Boethius. Now, what is secret and what is private should be of great interest to many of us. Not just because we suspect friends or colleagues from keeping secrets from us, but because many of us are concerned about the claims of influential organizations like governments and businesses secretly doing things they should not. Not just that, but often influential organizations hide their secrets behind talk of privacy and privacy concerns, or claims about information the public does not need to know. So in this talk, I want to look at the differences between keeping things private and keeping things secret. There is curiously little talk amongst philosophers, particularly epistemologists, those of us interested in the study of knowledge, on the topic of secrecy. There is, however, a burgeoning literature on the matter of privacy. As we will see, certain philosophers of privacy draw analogies between being private and being secretive, and assume that a discussion of the former will inform our understanding of the latter. However, I am going to argue that when we talk about privacy, we are often concerned with the protection of the privacy of fellow citizens. But when we talk about secrecy, much of our interest surrounding talk of secrets surrounds the revelation of secrets and why secrets should not be kept. As such, our interest in privacy is often phrased in terms of protecting our privacy from prying interests, while our interest in secrecy is not necessarily so virtuous. We are allowed to be private, but it is not clear that we are entitled to keeping secrets, or, if we are entitled to keeping secrets, that we can easily condemn those who want to look into them regardless. As such, I think we should treat secrecy and privacy as separate epistemic categories. There is, I will argue, an obvious difference in the intentions of people when it comes to keeping secrets and keeping things private, which speaks to what I take as a central, interesting issue of secrecy: the fact that the keeping of our own secrets requires knowledge, which is different to the justification of the belief that someone is keeping secrets from us. So despite surface similarities, I will argue you cannot expect to mop up issues surrounding secrecy by reference to issues about privacy. Privacy is kept, while secrets are concealed. Now, part of my interest in this work stems from my earlier, and admittedly still ongoing, research into these things called conspiracy theories. In my earlier work, I argued that despite people thinking they knew what constituted conspiratorial activity, and what the domain of a conspiracy theory was, it turned out that people were working with different definitions, and thus the weird dichotomy of research programs into conspiracy theories found in different disciplinary domains came out of people assuming everyone was working with the same concepts. My suspicion was, and admittedly still is, that discussion of secrecy suffers from the very same problem. We all intuitively know what a secret is and what constitutes secretive activity, but when we start trying to sort out the issues, it turns out that we are not all on the same page. And let me give you an example from the privacy literature. Sometimes academics talk about privacy in such sweeping terms that it includes things which seem like they would be better talked about as being secret. Take this paragraph from David Matheson. Just the fact I have no privacy with respect to my spouse and information about my life savings, it doesn't follow that I have no privacy with respect to you and that personal information about me. Nor does it follow from the fact I lack privacy relative to my spouse that I lack privacy relative to her, say about the amount of cream I habitually consume with my coffee at the office, or about my plans to surprise her with a gift next month. Matheson talks here about keeping private from his spouse the amount of cream in his coffee, and the organization of a surprise gift. These seem like weird things to keep private from a spouse. Presumably, Matheson has too much cream in his coffee, something his spouse would be concerned about. That this doesn't seem to be a private concern, but rather something he is keeping secret from her. The surprise gift is also, I would argue, obviously a secret. Neither of these two examples seem to comfortably suit the idea of being merely private concerns. Now, the reason why Matheson works with this particular conception is that Matheson takes it that privacy is in fact just a kind of secrecy. To act privately is to act in the subset of general secretive activity. And you might be tempted by the idea that privacy is just a special kind of secret, the kind of secret which concerns personal information, as we will shortly get to in some depth. When we keep secrets and we keep things private, we are, in some sense, controlling who has access to certain information. Now, if that is all there is really to privacy, keeping personal information from others, then privacy would turn out to be a subset of secrecy generally. As such, a fulsome account of secrecy should also provide us with an account of privacy, and conversely, the literature on a particular kind of secrecy, privacy, should lead us, with some work, to the development of an epistemology of secrecy generally. Now, for example, Martin Blau claims there is an intuitive connection between privacy, secrecy, and knowledge, and Cecilia Bock, who literally wrote the philosophical treatise on secrecy, the book Secrets, back in the early 80s, claims that in a secularized Western society, privacy has come to seem, for some, the only levitate form of secrecy. Consequently, the two are sometimes mistakenly seen as identical. So Blau, in the 2010s, says there is an intuitive connection between secrecy and privacy, while Bock, back in the early 80s, sees this as a mistaken conflation of two similar but distinct categories of knowledge. Now, this similarity between secrets and privacy is understandable. There is, after all, something similar about how we keep secrets and how we act in a privative fashion. In both cases, we keep information from or control the flow of information to others. Now, part of this is, of course, a language issue, and this is where being a monolingual only English speaker is something which I'd like to test on those of you who are multilingual and thus much more intelligent than I, as to how talking of privacy and secrecy works in languages outside of English. Because in English, there is a lot of conflation or confusion. Take, for example, the phrase not being privy to. When one is not privy to some information, that can apply to information which is private or information which is secret. I am not privy to my mother's voting record, a private matter I am constantly told, or the trade negotiations of my government, which is, according to the government of New Zealand, a necessary secret, at least according to the officials for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Privy here refers to both secrets and privacy, which either speaks to their commonality, one is a subset of the other, or, in my hypothesis, serves to confuse the matter. So in order to explicate privacy from secrecy, it will be necessary to reveal some secrets and not be so privative about privacy. Now, we know people keep secrets. As I stated in the introduction, you know that I am keeping at least a few secrets from you, and you also know something about the content of those secrets, namely that they pertain to the topic of this talk. This puts you into an interesting position, because if you are a keen student of what I am going to say, then, like the attentive reader of the Constellation of Philosophy, you may well, by the end of this discussion, be able to work out what I am keeping secret from you. Now, when I keep something secret, there are a multitude of ways I can guarantee my secrecy. For example, if I never tell you what the X in my set of middle names refers to, I can keep it secret by virtue, unless you have a mind-reading device, that no one else but me can ever know what it means. Now, keeping secrets by simply never telling people about them is relatively easy, but things get interesting as soon as I decide to share a secret with someone else. As long as I still want other people not to know my secret, then I am obliging the person with whom I shared my secret to keep it secret as well. As soon as I swear someone to secrecy over some matter, I have to work out how to manage who knows and should not know my secret. This can be as easy as knowing I can trust someone with said secret. So, if we have a good personal relationship, I should be able to tell you my secrets and know to a certain extent you won't share them with other people. Of course, there are going to be certain exception clauses. If I share with you that I am a mass murderer, no matter how good a friend you are, your good ethical character might still oblige you to go to the authorities to report me. But in most cases, when you share secrets with people you trust, you know that if that trusting relationship is good, that secret shouldn't leave them. And of course, sometimes you might have to share a secret with someone you don't trust, at which point you may have to engage in a little bit of blackmail, or saying that you know secrets about them that they also wouldn't want to get out. So sometimes you can keep secrets by engaging in truly unethical behavior with other human beings. Now, of course, no matter how well or badly I keep my secrets, there's always the chance that people will suspect me of keeping secrets, and this suspicion will be plausible or implausible according to the available evidence. If I avoid talking about what the X in the set of my middle names refers to, then you might think there's some secret about what that X refers to. And if I avoid all discussions about the reasons my grandfather fled Germany in the early 20th century, then you may well think I'm keeping some sinister secrets about events in my family history and the like. Now, this tells us something interesting about secrets. You can know secrets are being kept without knowing what those secrets are, and you can, in some cases, work out the likely shape of those secrets, even if you never come to know the actual specifics. If I evade all questions about my time at the Institute for Research in the Humanities at the University of Bucharest, you might come to think I'm trying to conceal something about that period of my life from you. As such, you will know I am keeping something secret, and that the secret pertains to a particular time and place in my life, even if I never mention the fact It concerns the existence of a Nazi. Compare then secrecy with privacy. Private matters are personal, and we see this in how privacy is typically defined. Take, for example, Martin Bloor, who defines privacy as, I apologize here for the philosophy, a three-place relation between a subject S, a set of propositions P, and a set of individuals I. S is the subject who has a certain degree of privacy. P is composed of those propositions the subject wants to keep private, called the propositions in the set personal propositions, and I is composed of those individuals with respect to whom S wants to keep the personal propositions private. S has privacy about P with respect to I. Privacy is about the control of information, namely controlling what information we want people to know about ourselves. As Bloor writes, we don't just want anyone to know just anything about us. We want to be able to control which persons obtain knowledge of which private or secret facts about ourselves in which context. Put differently, we don't want to be known to the same degree by just anyone in any old situation. Now, Bloor here is once again comparing secrecy with privacy, and it is true that in both cases, information is being controlled. And it is also true that we can both be privative about personal facts and also secretive about the same facts. Take, for example, gender identity. Gender identity is a very personal thing, given that no matter what biological characteristics you present, the sense of what gender you identify with is something that only you can experience, and it is entirely up to you whether you share that sense of identification with others. That is, gender identity is personal and thus can be considered within the domain of information you are entitled to be private about. When you act privately, you are keeping information about yourself to yourself. This is not necessarily out of any desire to conceal information, but rather because there are certain things people do not necessarily need to know about you. A private person can appear secretive, but private people are not necessarily concealing things from you. Rather, they are not sharing information with you because of a lack of comfort or trust in you. Now, of course, you might choose to conceal your gender identity and keep it secret. Not just that, but some things you might think should be private to others will treat as being kept secret from them. For example, being privative about your gender's partner is considered secretive in some, and some would say most, cultural situations. Now, of course, there's an interesting aspect of this with respect to family secrets and what is considered private information. The existence of my adopted out brother might be kept secret from me, whilst my mother's friends might not ask her about her 6-month disappearance because they think such a matter is private to her. My brother's existence is thus a secret to me, and a matter no one who is an inkling pries into because of privacy concerns. As such, some information can be both private and secretive at the same time, depending on who the information is not shared with and who it is intentionally concealed from. Private information, then, like secrets, can be shared and still be considered secret as long as certain people do not know them. However, unlike privacy, it is easy to imagine that you might only want to keep something secret from one particular person. It would be strange, however, to think that a matter everyone but your parents know is suitably private. This suggests a salient difference between privacy and secrecy has to do with just how many people know. To keep something private, one need only in many cases keep quiet. I might keep my gender identification or sex life private because these are things only people I trust ought to know about. When you are private, you are not sharing personal information with others, where that personal information might be strictly personal to you, or it might be personal to your family or to your close-knit set of friends. But to keep something secret, however, requires that you intentionally conceal information from someone. Of course, while someone who is private is not necessarily secretive, they may look that way to someone else. It is easy then to mistake acting in a privative fashion with the keeping of secrets, especially if we are actively engaged in trying to find out details about someone, or we think we're in a better relationship with that person than we actually are. So there is a tension between what you as an outsider consider privative behavior and what others might consider to be secretive in the same case. So, how do we, or how can we, tell the difference between someone being privative and someone acting secretively? After all, someone can be private without necessarily keeping secrets, and someone who is utterly public when it comes to personal affairs may well harbour a lot of secrets. What we can say is that privacy always concerns information which is personal and also true. You do not keep falsehoods private, and things which are not personal do not end up being the domain of information we consider to be properly kept private. Yet secrecy need not necessarily concern the personal, although it can, and secrets, and this might be controversial, need not even be true. Now the first is worth noting. I can keep secret things which do not concern me, or things to which I have no personal connection. So, I can keep secret all those murders I committed, all those murders you committed, and all the murders I've been told about. I can also keep secret the fact that Aotearoa, New Zealand has an active nuclear missile program, a secret we Kiwis must conceal from the rest of the world. It just seems that we can keep secret anything, whether it be personal or impersonal. Whether you can keep these secrets successfully is another matter entirely. But more interestingly, and perhaps most controversially, I argue we can keep falsehoods secret. Now, this is straightforwardly denied by Martin Bloor, who writes, "One cannot, for instance, keep a falsehood secret. Of course, one can think one is keeping a false proposition secret if one mistakenly thinks this proposition to be true." I love the double brackets there. Secrecy has to do with hiding facts. Likewise, one cannot reveal a falsehood. Again, one can think one is revealing a false proposition if one mistakenly thinks this proposition to be true. Revelation has to do with the revealing of facts. However, I would argue there is nothing contradictory about keeping some falsehood secret. For example, I can try to keep gossip which happens to be false about me secret, because even though it is not true, people might still believe it if they happen to hear it. Perhaps I've gone out of my way to appear as an immoral character, and thus people are liable to believe the worst of me. As such, I hear some gossip about me which paints me in a bad light, and thus I intentionally conceal it from you. That would be a case of me at least trying to keep a falsehood secret. It might be a weird thing to do, but it's still a case of me keeping something secret from you. Indeed, as Bock says, I thought I had this requirement, "I shall take concealment or hiding to be the defining trait of secrecy." So, Bloor is right that what we keep private is by definition true. But to reveal a secret is not necessarily about the revealing of a fact, but rather revealing what has been intentionally concealed from others. Blau here is concerning issues to do with privacy with issues to do with secrecy in this issue. And of course, this speaks to another interesting aspect of secrecy. We can at least try to keep anything secret, including things which are relatively well known. Take, for example, the recent scandal in the US where President Donald Trump is trying to keep his affair with Stormy Daniels secret. Now, it turns out you don't have to be very good at keeping secrets to continue to try keep something which is well known to the public in the realm of secrecy. So people can be very bad at keeping secrets, but they are still acting secretively. And yet we wouldn't say the same thing about someone who is trying to be privative. Someone is not privative if they're not very good at respecting their own privacy. Well, someone can be secretive even though they are very bad at keeping secrets. Now, one way to distinguish between what is secret and what is private might be to explore the way in which information which is either secret or private transitions from being relatively unknown to becoming well known. Private information is relatively unknown. Now, by relatively here, I mean that it is known to the person to whom it is kept private, so at least one person knows, so it's not totally unknown. But its knownness beyond that will be generally limited. So private matters are relatively unknown because the privative person knows what they are keeping private, and presumably only a few people outside of that private person have any idea of what is being kept private. So if I'm privative about my gender identity, I am simply not sharing that information with others, making it relatively unknown. I can also keep it that way because private information, because it is considered private, people are unlikely to start asking specific questions about it. So when it comes to things which are typically taken culturally to be private, there is a cultural norm which says in most cases you're not meant to ask questions of that particular type. Of course, these cultural norms will change from culture to culture and also from time to time. My mother is always asking me, when are my friends going to start having children? And I keep pointing out to her that in my culture, at least for my generation, that is private information that is not meant to be shared and not meant to be asked about. And my mother says that is nonsense because in her day, asking people when you're going to have your first child was considered to be a very polite thing to do. So cultural norms will dictate what fits into private and what isn't private at any particular point in time. But of course, the mechanisms by which a private person might employ to keep their privacy will often at least appear to be the same mechanisms of the secretive person. Secrets also require that information is relatively unknown. Once again, the person who holds the secret will know what the secret is, and there will be a directed target of people who are not meant to know it. But that's the important aspect. Secrecy is directed in a way that privacy is not. When I am private, I am simply not sharing personal details with just anyone. But when I am secretive, I am intentionally concealing some information from a particular set of people. That is to say, secrecy has an explicit target, whilst privacy is a general attitude towards the sharing of information. I might only need to keep my secret of the litany of murders I've committed from the investigating officers of the local constabulary. That is, I will keep that secret from certain people, and thus it is possible for a secret to be well known amongst many people, but purposely concealed from just a few. But my gender identity, that would be personal information that no one needs to know. Now, with regard to private information, the final arbiter of who gets to know is the person it is personal to. If I decide to share information with you, then I have decided that you need to know it. And that actually gets you into the awkward aspect of privacy, which is that sometimes people will think you need to know private information that you have absolutely no interest in knowing, and not just that, really would rather have never found out in the first place. So privacy also has a rather interesting aspect here about the way that you can be made privy to private information you have no inquiry towards. But when it comes to secrecy, the argument for needing to know changes. When something is personal, then my right to say, you do not need to know this, should suffice on its own. So, because private information is personal, I have the right to deny you that personal information, apart from in certain legal situations where I might be obliged to give that information, say for the application of a residency permit to stay in Romania until July 31st and the like. But outside of that legal setting, it will turn out that if you ask me personal information, I have the right to simply say no, and you really don't have any rejoinder to say, but I need to know, and say no, you don't. But when it comes to secrecy, the argument for needing to know changes. When something is personal, saying you don't need to know should suffice. But when something is secret, then claiming that someone does not need to know typically requires some further argument. So, if the government of Aotearoa, New Zealand says, you don't need to know what our negotiating position is for the free trade deal with the EU post-Brexit, then the people of New Zealand can say, well, we need some further argument. Why is it we don't need to know? A wise government will then say, well, telling you publicly what our bottom line is for negotiations with the EU for a free trade deal will mean the EU will know exactly what our bottom lines are, making it quite difficult for our government to negotiate with their federal government. So you don't need to know because it would adversely affect our bargaining position. So you need some further argument in that particular case to explain why someone doesn't need to know. Of course, the worry is, as we discover with a lot of political discourse, that often when governments say, you don't need to know this, that's all they say, thus inviting the suspicion that the reasons are not totally above board and possibly not even particularly virtuous. So this raises the awkward question. Who or how do we decide who gets to know? That is, who can I talk to about the secrets or private information I know? Now, the easy answer is that unless I am specifically told who else knows, I should not say anything about privacy. If I entrust you with information which is clearly private, which might be signaled with an explicit, this is private, or it happens to be information which is typically considered to be private in your particular culture, then you should say nothing about it to anyone, with a few exceptions. There might be situations where breaking privacy is useful for, say, police inquiry, or if you're worried about a friend's mental health, there are situations where actually I must break privacy will turn out to be virtuous. But in most situations, if someone has marked out information as being private, and you find out about it, you shouldn't be passing it on or talking about it to someone you don't suspect, or and perhaps even stronger, don't already knows the same propositional content. So unless there's some other particular concern, you keep private information private. But of course, sometimes we don't respect privacy because we think the matter described as private by a person actually happens to be a secret. So the fact I knew a groomer of a young woman might well be seen as a private matter to his family, a matter they would rather not be discussed with others, even though I think what they are doing is keeping deplorable behavior secret such that this groomer will be able to continue that behavior in future. So even though it's been marked out as private to me, I consider that this is false, and that actually what they are obliging me to do is to keep something secret, and I feel it should move from the relatively unknown to the should be well known to everyone. Now, we tend to think that protecting privacy is good, and the keeping of secrets is bad. In this respect, I argue, our differing interests indicates a difference in kind, but this difference, admittedly, might just concern how we distinguish between someone is merely acting privately or actually acting secretively. After all, it is difficult to tell without some inside information whether the things you are not being told is merely a private matter or something which is being kept secret from you. Most of us accept that we have no right to pry into personal matters. However, keeping secrets from people is treated as being at the very least suspicious, if not actually sinister. Now, it's probably important to make a note on this. Privacy, we take it, as something which we are entitled to engage in. But as soon as you admit to keeping secrets, people are going to be suspicious as to why that information can't be shared. Secrets are not inherently sinister things. Secrets can be kept for a variety of virtuous reasons. But unless you can provide a rationale which explains why this particular bit of information is being kept secret, people are going to, in many cases, suspect the worst and assume that your rationale hides some kind of sinister intent. And it then doesn't help that, of course, we don't always believe people's rationales about why things are being kept secret. And we see this a lot in political discourse, and that often governments or influential institutions will say this must be kept secret, and here is our rationale, and our past experience of that government or those series of institutions go, well, they've lied about why they kept secrets in the past. It's reasonable to think they're lying about why they're keeping secrets now. If they're lying about why they're keeping secrets now, that gives me reason to think that what's being kept secret from us is not virtuous, but in many respects sinister for some particular rationale. And this is going to largely depend on the kind of culture you live in. So in previous work, I've talked about this with respect to conspiracies, which are a very particular kind of secrecy, joint secrecy, where if you live in a society where conspiracies are common, you are likely to suspect conspiracies are going to be common now. If you live in a society where conspiracies are not particularly common, people claiming, oh, I think there's a conspiracy going on here, you're more likely to treat derisively. So if you come from Aotearoa, New Zealand, one of the more transparent nations in the world, you might well think a conspiracy at the heart of government is something which is unlikely. Whilst if you come from Romania, which has one of the more openly corrupt governments, I don't apologise for saying that, I've lived here long enough now to see what PSD does on a day-by-day basis, then someone saying, I think there's something else behind what the government is saying, you might well go, yes, there probably is something behind what the government is saying. In the past they've lied about judicial reforms, why wouldn't they be lying about judicial reforms this time round as well? So yes, so we think that protecting privacy is good, but we often think that revealing secrets is something that we should do. Or at the very least, we should get to the root of the matter as to why something is being kept secret. Now, what's interesting about the privacy issue is that often we think that there's a right to privacy. So this right can be expressed in moral terms, as most moral philosophers will engage in. They will say, look, you have a moral right to keep information about yourself private. And sometimes these rights, depending on the polity you're in, will be enshrined in a legalistic framework as well. So you might be in a situation where you are not obliged to reveal particular information about yourself to the authorities, even though the authorities would really like to see it. And most of the privacy literature in philosophy happens to talk about what we call informational privacy, the notion that citizens of polities have privacy with respect to the government and influential institutions that exist in their lives, and when you're allowed to erode privacy and when privacy must be protected absolutely. Now, of course, if you've got a right to privacy only works if there's an associated duty, a duty which allows you to say, look, when I express my right to privacy, you are duty-bound to not infringe that right. And David Matheson expresses the right to privacy with what he calls the duty of ignorance. So, if privacy ignorance is true, S1 has a moral right to privacy relative to some proposition P, and to S2, some other person. Then S1 is morally entitled to S2 not knowing P. But rights generally entail corresponding obligation, aka duties, for those against whom right bearers hold the rights. Hence, if S1 is morally entitled to S2's ignorance of P, S2 has a moral obligation of ignorance with respect to P. Thus, if privacy is true, the duty of ignorance here, and there is such a thing as a moral right to privacy, then there is such a thing as a moral duty of ignorance. So in short, if we accept that someone has a right to privacy, then we must accept we have a duty or obligation to be ignorant of what they want to keep private, which is to say that we should not pry into private affairs. The difference between secrecy and privacy then is this. We generally take it is morally permissible to be private, and think there's an attending duty of ignorance with it, if you accept Matheson's argument here. But it's not clear that secrecy is either morally permissible, or even in cases where it is morally permissible, that we have a duty to be ignorant of what is being kept secret. Now, once again, this is not to deny that keeping secrets is immoral or never permissible. But whereas privacy is allowable, even laudable in most situations, keeping secrets is at the very least suspicious, as I argued before, if not actually sinister, as I hinted at. And we can see this if we adapt Matheson's duty of ignorance to be about secrecy rather than privacy, where you'd say the duty of ignorance would be where S has secrecy relative to some proposition P and to some other person, as long as that other person doesn't know the propositional content of what is being kept secret. Now, if this duty were true, and I had a right to secrecy relative to some secret I'm keeping from you, then I would be entitled to you not knowing about that secret. But to claim that I have the right to say you don't need to know about that secret seems strange. If we allow that there is a right to being secretive, that doesn't entail a corresponding duty that S must be ignorant and thus not pry into P. We are allowed to keep secrets. No one seems to argue against that, although I suppose there have been some regimes in the past which have argued that the panopticon must be active at all time, but most of us will accept we are allowed to keep secrets. There just doesn't appear to be a corresponding duty that we are not allowed to pry into the secrets of others. After all, finding out that the car we want to purchase has been stolen may well very change our minds about buying said vehicle. A car dealer may have the right to keep the history of their car secret, but we have the right to inquire into the purchase history of that car if we want to make a sound investment in an automobile. So if there is a corresponding duty to secrecy, then surely it is the duty of keeping secret what you have been told or found out about, although this duty can be easily trumped. If I find out something which is being kept secret, I might find out upon working out the content of that secret that I am obliged to keep it secret, or I am obliged to reveal it to the world. Learning the car I want to buy is stolen might lead me to keep that secret if I think that means the price is going to be low enough, so I oblige the secret keeper by going, yes, if you sell it to me cheaply enough, I will never reveal who actually owned this car originally. Or finding out that my country has a secret nuclear weapons program might lead me to keep that secret from you if I think that protects my country's interests. New Zealand does not have a secret weapons program. Whether you believe that or not, of course, is another matter entirely. Then again, if the reason behind the secret is not to my liking, I may decide to reveal the information to someone else, and that doesn't seem problematic. But it would do in the case of privacy, because breaking privacy is typically considered to be sinister. But breaking secrecy or revealing secrets does not have quite the same stigma. Indeed, the suspicion something is being kept secret might oblige some of us to investigate said secrets, which is, I would argue, another case where secrecy and privacy come uncoupled. We might be obliged to look into someone's secret or their reasons for keeping it secret for a variety of reasons, from the personal to suspected malfeasance and the like. And this, I argue, speaks to a fundamental difference between secrecy and privacy. Our duties towards them are fundamentally different, and the kind of justifications required to defend secrecy requires a further level of argumentation that we do not associate with privacy. Oh, I skipped an entire slide there. Now, when you are private, you do not share information which is considered both true and personal with the people that you do not trust. That is, when you act in a private fashion, you are keeping information from others. Secrets, however, are concealed. Whilst both secrecy and privacy concerns cases where we do not intentionally pass on information to those we do not trust, when we act privately, we keep personal facts from people who we do not trust, nor do we consider need to know said information. But in the case of secrecy, we intentionally conceal information from people for what turn out to be a variety of reasons. As Bock put it back in 1982, why then are privacy and secrecy so often equated? In part, this is because privacy is such a central part of what secrecy protects that it can easily be seen as the whole. People claim privacy for differing amounts of what they are and do and own. If need be, they seek the added protection of secrecy. In each case, their purpose is to become less vulnerable, more in control. And herein lies, I would argue, the problem of perception when it comes to secrecy and privacy, which I think dogs the academic talk of privacy and why people want to fold secrecy into talk of privacy. And it's because, from an outside perspective, the private individual can look secretive, and the secretive individual can look privative. Whilst being privative may mean intentionally keeping access to some information about myself from other people, this is different in intent from actively concealing it from others. Of course, from an outside perspective, this difference in intent is hard to discern. I can know the difference between what I keep private and what I keep secret, but you may not. Especially since the role of trust in both privacy and secrecy is central to our personal understanding of who we share information with. As mentioned earlier, private matters concern things you would not normally tell someone you do not trust. Yet the same is typically true of secrets. The people you share secrets with are typically the kind of people you happen to think are trustworthy. Although I suppose the difference here is You don't blackmail people to keep things... Well, you don't typically blackmail people to keep things private. As soon as blackmail gets involved, you're moving from the private into the secretive in that respect, although I'm willing to debate that. Now, thinking someone is trustworthy is different from them being trustworthy. This at least is an issue for both being private and keeping secrets. Not only can we get that judgment wrong, but we might also be in trusting relationships with others which trump our duties in certain privacy or secrecy cases. You might think a parent should keep their child's secrets, but if that secret is Alex is a murderer, then said parent might think they are obliged to reveal that fact to the authorities because of their duties to others. Guarding someone's privacy can also make you look like you are acting secretively. But when you protect the privacy of another, in the case of where you know what is being kept private, you are not being secretive. You are simply respecting that certain personal information you are privy to should not be shared with others. Of course, this perception or appearance can be abused, because one can appear secretive by being private, and someone who is keeping a secret might claim to be privative in order to cover up the fact they are intentionally concealing something from you. The difference is that private matters are the kind of thing which should never become well known. Privacy is very much an individual thing. I am private. However, keeping a secret actually in many cases can be a group activity, the conspiracy being a great example of this. If we want to keep that thing we did last summer a secret, that is a joint operation of multiple people keeping something secret from outsiders. Whilst you can respect someone's privacy and also not share personal details someone wants to keep private, you are not, as I said, being privative, but rather respecting someone else's privacy. However, to keep someone's secret requires that you act secretively yourself. So, you are private and you respect other people's privacy, but when you are being secretive and you share that secret with another, you are not respecting that person's secret, but actually engaging in the act of secrecy itself once you are let in. And that's not the case when it comes to if you share private information with people. So while we can distinguish privacy from secrecy in certain cases, information which is not shared and is which is shared and is neither personal nor true, in a range of cases it will be hard for someone to know whether what is being concealed from them is private or secret. This, though, is a problem of perception, and not, I would argue, a result of privacy being a kind of secret. So in conclusion, from the perspective of an outsider, it can be hard to distinguish between what someone keeps secret and what someone considers to be private. At the very least, we can say a secret is some piece of information which is intentionally concealed from someone else. You might think that privacy is a kind of secret, but privacy is very much an individual thing. I am private. Keeping a secret, though, it can be in many cases a kind of group activity. We keep what we did, as I said last summer, a secret. Whilst you can respect someone's privacy and also not share personal details someone wants to keep private, you're not being privative, but rather respecting that privacy. But to share in a secret requires one to act secretively yourself. You can also keep falsehoods secret. Now this might, as I said, seem counterintuitive to some, but the idea of secrecy is about intentionally concealing some information from another person. That information doesn't need to be true, and it also doesn't necessarily need to be something which isn't particularly well known. To try and keep a secret is to try to make sure that at least one person out in the world doesn't find out about some particular bit of information you don't want them to know. So Donald Trump is presumably being very, very successful in keeping at least one person in America ignorant about the affair he had with Stormy Daniels. So despite what appear to be surface similarities between secrecy and privacy, I do not think you can expect to mop up issues surrounding secrecy by reference to issues about privacy. Because privacy is kept, it's about controlling the flow of information people don't need to know, while secrets are concealed, it's about targeting and making sure that certain people don't find out about the propositional content of the thing you are keeping secret. That is, secrecy and privacy are different ways of keeping or controlling the flow of information from others. Whilst they both rely on keeping information from others, privacy concerns not sharing personal information generally, while secrecy concerns concealing information from particular persons. The fact we associate different duties with respect to the keeping of secrets and the keeping of privacy, I think speaks to them as different kinds of knowledge, or perhaps more importantly, the weird lacuna of relatively unknown things, and thus they are in need of their own separate analyses. We should be keeping our secrets separate from our privacy, even if that does lend to a certain confusion amongst friends as to whether we're being secretive or privative at any particular point in time. The end.